call myself the Sarcastic Marketer, and I help new coaches tap into their own humanity. That's what coaches do. That's the big thing right now, is making a lot of money. And there's just so much the seven-figure mentality, money making mentality, which is, hey, who doesn't want to make a lot of money? But when it comes across as something that's like a promise that cannot actually happen, that's when it becomes problematic. It's their heart, it's their soul, it's their body, not somebody else's, not Tony Robbins, not Brene Brown's, not all of these people who are famous personal development people, which can often happen in the world of coaching. You want to be like this person, or you want to be this coach, and you're going to put this coaching business out there that just is not, it's not in alignment with who you are as a person.
Life flows like an endless ocean of stories. We often miss these precious tales as we rush through our days, too consumed by daily struggles to notice the poetry swirling around us. Yet within these stories lie the keys to our past, sparks for our creativity, and fresh wings to fill our sails. I am Abhra, a writer based in Melbourne, in quest of those stories with diverse voices that tell them from every corner of the world. Welcome to Stories and Stanza. Hi Gregory, welcome to Stories and Stanza. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. Really happy to be here.
I'm happy to host you on my show as well. Stories and Stanza has different segments or categories. One of the series is Fail With Me, which is where we will be talking today. Before we get started, could you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hi, yes, I'm Gregory Halpen, and my work is marketing. So I call myself the Sarcastic Marketer, and I help new coaches tap into their own humanity and their own true self, so they can let that shine through their coaching work, their marketing work, just not fall into the cookie cutter approach of doing. There's a lot of sleazy kind of marketing things that are happening. So I want to help new coaches avoid that and just put something out into the world that's actually helpful.
Yes, the traditional world of marketing is very difficult and sometimes it is awkward as well. I attend a lot of tech conferences because of my work. Every time I attend some event like that, they get my coordinates and then they keep calling me. Even if I say that I don't want to be called, the cold calls at some stage becomes an harassment. What you mentioned about being authentic is very important. In this section, authenticity is something I am really hoping to build with this podcast community with all my amazing guests. So I decided to call it Fail With Me because I felt that a lot of motivational articles and speeches, they say that, oh, you're failing, you're doing this wrong, and you have to do this to get it right. Somehow that narrative didn't sit well with me. So I thought that if I write about my story, then I'll call it Fail With Me. I'll at least give some amount of comfort to someone who is reading and listening. I'll not be critical. I'll say that it's okay to fail and look into your failure and build from there, build our resilience and healing and everything from there. How does that idea sound to you?
I love your concept and your idea because it just sounds like community. It sounds like connection. It's the opposite of individualism. And I think that's how we learn, right? We learn and grow and change through relationships. And I think how you're doing this is just the perfect vehicle for that.
Thank you so much. And when I when this title came to me, I thought that this is going to be
Love it.
my story. And when I opened up for the podcast and I had guests started joining, I felt that I was looking at it from just my story, but this is such a big and such a wider sort of sense of community in it that I love exploring the theme in different perspectives with it.
Mhm.
Right. So, for our listeners, could you give a summary of what ideas you are going to explain to us today?
Just some ideas around failure, like what I think failure is and how I process failure and certain parts of what's missing in society, maybe that we can improve upon so we can maybe foster more compassion and empathy, which is a lot of what is muffled in our society, depending on which country you're from, but most speaking mostly from the United States because that's where I'm from. But yeah, so basically that just being okay with talking about failure and how stigmatic it is, how much a stigma is wrapped around failure, and how much shame comes with failure, and depending on race, class, and gender, depending on all of that too, how all of that factors in how we process failure, which is all very interesting. So those are some of the things I'd love to talk about.
One of the reasons which motivated me to start talking about it was that we come across failures in different ways, and we stigmatize this a lot. We just say that this is wrong, you have failed, you have not achieved what you wanted. We never unpack those feelings, say that you failed but you also learn, or you failed as many times as you succeeded. So that is one of the core interests for me that got me started. Tell me about your thoughts and how we can normalize failure, how we can accept it and build our resilience from that.
We can say that we can learn from failure, and failure is okay, and it's something that is natural, that happens because it is. It's something that is part of the growing process of being a human being. But I think we also need to bring in emotions and feelings and all of that around into this conversation too, because those are very important. Failing is scary, especially when you're under pressure by parents, peers, certain expectations people have of you. And if you don't meet those expectations, then you failed, and then you are going to, then I internalize it. I try to keep it to I statements. I'm really into that, keeping it just direct to myself. So I feel as though I did something wrong. And I talk about this a lot in my work as a coaching person, a marketing person who helps new coaches. And I talk about the pressures to get caught up in this rabbit hole of making money really fast, building a list really fast with all these marketing people who are just telling you, you can do this, you can build this, and you can make money in 2 hours or whatever. But if we fall into that trap and we try it out and we do the program and then it doesn't work and then we failed at it. So I feel like I'm a failure now. I did something wrong here. I didn't do this the right way. So I'm a loser. So I'm never going to achieve what I want to achieve. When in actuality, there was something wrong with the program or the delivery or the promise that was given. So I think that bringing that part into this conversation, the darker side of it, the scary side of it, the part that triggers maybe addiction, maybe some sort of like exacerbates mental health challenges when we think about failure. Excuse me. And like I said before, like it also, there's a lot to consider, such as race, gender, and class. Like all of that has a huge thing to do with this topic of failure. I think it does.
When you start working with the coaches, what are some barriers that you notice? What is holding them back? What is stopping them from realizing their potential?
I think when you're a new coach and you graduated from coaching school and you're certified and you're ready to coach people, then you just have this idea like you're taught this, you learn this while you're studying and when you're in the coaching community and you're just part of all of this stuff that you have to get out there and you have to start building a practice and you have to start making money really fast and you want to be successful at coaching because that's what's happening. That's what coaches do. That's the big thing right now is making a lot of money. And there's just so much the 7-figure mentality, money making mentality, which is, hey, who doesn't want to make a lot of money? But when it comes across as something that's like a promise that cannot actually happen, that's when it becomes problematic. So new coaches believe that. They fall into the trap and stop we stop listening to our guts. We stop listening to the very main reason why we got into coaching in the first place. And I did that. I fell into the trap too. And I almost fell into the trap of wanting to be one of those coaches where buy my program and you'll get rich. And then I'll end up making money. And that person may not be making the same kind of money. And that's just totally gross and problematic. But I had to remember why I got into coaching. And part of it was not by accident, but just something that I thought I had to do because I was stuck. And I'm ready. I'm a solo performer too. I'm an actor. And so I'm writing a solo show, a new show about this very topic about life coaching. And I make a joke about it. And as the George Bernard Shaw, I think he wrote, I hope it's him. If it's not, then I look foolish. But if it is, he wrote this. There's a quote by him that goes, if you can do, if you can't teach. But I say, if you can do, and if you can't, become a life coach. So I make a joke. So that is when you fail at everything else and you fail at this and you fail at that, then what's the last thing you're going to be a life coach? Everybody else is doing it. But part of it was that, but then part of it was I fell in love with coaching because I personally needed to work through a lot of stuff, a lot of trauma. And at the time that I found coaching in 2007, I didn't realize it then, but I was like, why am I being this life coach when I need help healing myself first? So to circle back around to your question and to the heart of what I'm trying to say is that we forget why we get into it in the first place, why we start. And I think that's one of the main things that I talk about with coaches is reconnecting with that.
Can you tell us about how you got started? What motivated you? What set you on this path of coaching?
2007, and I spent a great deal of my life just being a lost person, very lost, very coming from a home life of trauma and then carrying that into my adult life and perpetuating certain behaviors and stuff that was maladaptive. And so I don't know, it was just something that I was trying to get on this healing journey of looking within myself and trying to figure out why I was always stuck. And then I don't know, I think I fell into some sort of coaching community of some sort. I can't remember. And I just felt, wow, this is really interesting. I love this. And it just felt attractive to me. Right. And I think even then, back in 2007, when coaching was just getting started and getting close to mainstream, it still had this allure to it. It still had this attractiveness to it that was part oh wow, this can be totally transforming, and at the same time there's a lot of toxic positivity aspects to it as well. And I think that's that part of the unhealthy part of me fell into that, wanted that. When coaches would present themselves and helping other coaches and learning to become a coach, there's just this whole painted picture of you can change your life and you can make the difference in the world and you can change the world, and all of these pithy platitudes around healing and personal development. So I think that part of me fell into that. But then there was a part of me too that was like, wow, this can probably be a good thing if I stuck with it. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's how I got my start in life coaching those many years ago.
You are also a performer and you're also a coach. How do you balance these two sort of parts of yourself?
I have a very strong background in musical theater. I'm a singer, actor, and I write my own solo shows nowadays. And with that training and with that experience, I've learned, finally, recently learned to integrate that into my coaching, which recently is when I discovered that I wanted to help coaches with marketing and stuff. That's like not something that I always did. I was a love coach, and then I was a different kind of coach. But when I finally owned who I am and my quirky sides and my sarcastic side and all of that, it just made sense. Like that's what I wanted to do. And when it comes to performing, for me, it's about storytelling. I'm a storyteller. So I infuse that or I integrate that into my coaching work, especially in my marketing, my own marketing that I do for my own business. I make it all about storytelling. So I feel like being able to marry the two together or have them work in tandem together helps with keeping it some sort of balance. It's never balanced completely. Sometimes I'm like, I want to be more creative. I want to act more. But then sometimes I'm like, I can't because I have to work. I have to do the coaching thing and I have to build this. So I guess it's just about finding ways for both to work together. And that's what I'm doing and I continue to figure it out. But I feel like the performing and the coaching can work together if I turn it all into storytelling. If I, transform it into some form of storytelling, truthful storytelling.
When you are an actor or performer, you have to take the soul of somebody else, get into the shape or mold of a character you're presenting. But when you are a
Hmm.
coach, you cannot let yourself get sucked into the emotions and the state of being of the person you are coaching, right? So, how isn't that a tricky balance?
That is a tricky balance, especially if you come from experience of not having certain things healed or certain things looked into when it comes to mental health, trauma, or whatever, then it'd be very hard to embody a different character. If I'm performing in a show and I'm performing as a different character, as a different person, it's my job to bring my whole self into that part, into that character. If that character is a bad person, I still have to find the humanity in that bad person, just so that person and my portrayal of that person can be believable, so people can relate to that person. But it's definitely a fine line. It's not an easy. That's why I
Mm.
like prefer doing solo theater now. That's like what I'm really into now because I feel like I get to create what I want to create. I don't have to, I can be myself or I can create a character that I create. And that just makes it more special for me. I feel more connected to that, I would say.
That is wonderful. And you guide coaches and you talked about authenticity. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you were to explain this to someone who needs coaching, okay, then if you just want to say it in very simple terms, that when we should look forward to getting someone's help as a coach, and what is it that I should expect from a coach? Because you said about your life's journey, you turning around things from trauma and your experience, and you
Mm-hmm.
felt that you can help people. But if I am asking just from audience that what is coaching and when do I know that I need to get help and what that help can transform me, how would you say that?
I would say first, there's definitely a difference between coaching and therapy. And I think maybe some people make that misunderstanding or get that confused because coaching doesn't necessarily help with the psychological aspects of personal development. Although I think it's important to be trauma informed as a coach. I think that's very important. So that would be the first determination. The person would need to understand, do I need therapy, or am I already working on my problems and my stuff and have a really good grasp on my mental health and all of that? I'm just ready for the next step, which is to help me organize my life and make things happen, things that I've always wanted to happen, the passions, the career, or whatever the person wants to manifest in their life. So yeah, it's a tightrope there. It's a, you have to, that is the first part of knowing if one needs coaching. And everybody could use coaching, of course, but someone may need therapy first before they can go to, or they could do it together. But I would recommend if therapy is the most needed thing, to do that first. But if someone wants coaching and they're ready to do coaching, then they would want to work on something very specific. I'd say something very specific would be a helpful place to start, to know what it is, instead of going into the coaching arena with, yeah, I don't know if I need this or if I need that. I think it's important to have an idea, even though the coach is there to help pull that out. I think it's good to have a starting point. That's why I help new coaches, because new coaches they're new. This pressure to market and to learn how to market. And when people think about marketing, people get sick to their stomachs about marketing. And I think it just can be less stressful than that, I think.
Do you coach people as well now, or do you just guide the coaches who are getting into the business?
Oh yeah, I coach the coaches. So I coach the coaches. So I work with them on self-sabotaging behaviors and mindset and attitude, and at the same time helping them define their marketing message in a way that sounds like them, that is their voice. It's their heart, it's their soul, it's their body, not somebody else's, not Tony Robbins, not Brene Brown's, not all of these people who are famous personal development people, which can often happen in the world of coaching. You want to be like this person, or you want to be this coach, and you're going to put this coaching business out there that just is not, it's not in alignment with who you are as a person. That's so you coach this, but now I know who you are. That doesn't sound like you. Like, who you are and who you're presenting yourself as a coach just does not make sense. I want to help them make sense of it and make it honest, make it truthful.
That's amazing. I'm always curious to understand this from my guests. What does healing look like to you? Because it is very different for very different people. It's hard
Mm-hmm.
to generalize. And this is something I hear a lot. We're doing the same thing over and over again. We don't step out of that. Can I ask you that what is the long path to healing? What is the path, journey to healing?
God, it's definitely individual for sure. Maybe there's a formula or some sort of like developmental process that every human goes through in order to heal. But I feel healing is just personal. I It took me a lot. I'm 54. I'll be 55 in March, and it took me until I turned 50, 51 or so to get to feel like, wow, I feel better now. I feel like I'm on a better path because I'm doing this work. But healing is just does not have a timeline. It doesn't have an expiration date. It's like an ongoing process, healing, and it's so like mixed, right? Healing is such a buzzword, especially within the coaching community. It's all about healing. And so what are we trying to heal? What are you trying to heal within yourself? So I don't know. I'd really like to hear more about that. Like, what are your ideas? What would you like to know from me? Because it's very hot.
If I can break it down a little bit, anxiety and anger could be one of the pillars. Then, like self doubt and self awareness could be another pillar. And then communicating and connecting with people, that could probably another pillar. And then, of course, there is this whole space of personal well-being. You have to keep yourself sane and stable and unaffected by everything that is getting
Mhm.
around. So, what I have come across and experienced myself is that I have a bad feeling about something. If I go into a presentation and I know everything to make that idea work, and the presentation doesn't go well, it gets thrown into completely different direction, and it affects me, and I am upset, and I feel that it just, yeah, it's just
We just go in there.
correct. Correct. That's something that troubled me for a while. I was thinking my self-worth was tangled with what I was trying to do, but it is so not. When I look at healing, I think of this as giving my mind an alternate path. I don't have to be upset. I don't have to be angry. I don't have to feel less confident. Everything, if I if I learn to deassociate myself from those emotions, then possibly I have a path B. It doesn't always have to be path A, which is unpleasant and leads to all these different states or different sort of negative emotions. And I feel there is a path B where I think that, okay, that was my presentation, that was people's reception, and those two have nothing to do with one another. Okay. And it is how I go to
Mm.
the next step that matters, which is a change in mindset, shall I say. So that is how I
Hmm.
see my healing. Okay. And I have
Mm.
struggled a lot in my life. And that is how I think a thumb rule that I try to apply to my own thoughts. I have something that's not working. Probably there is a path B, which is
Hmm.
not making me negative and upset and things like that.
I like that. You compartmentalize certain aspects of a problem so you can figure it out or so you can process it instead of it like making you drive off a cliff. Oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm failing.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I think that's helpful. Absolutely. I think I tend to try to do that, and I've been better at compartmentalizing certain issues. But then I think for me, the part that was missing for me is identifying emotions, identifying feelings that came up when I'm triggered or when like you said, you give a presentation and something doesn't go the way you want it to go. And then you're like, holy crap, you go into this. I don't know if you do this personally, but the potential to go into this dark side of I suck and I'm really bad at this. What am I doing? But deep down inside, you're really good. So it's like, how do we bridge that gap? So I think for me, I find identifying emotions because when something happens, we're triggered, the emotions happen, and then the emotions trigger behavior. And then there's this cycle, that thing that happens. So I think the thing that's missing in a lot of ways is, especially in society, is not being able to identify feelings and name feelings and emotions so we can like look at that and say, okay, I'm feeling scared right now, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling hurt, instead of feeling those feelings and then just having them go run amok somewhere without really understanding what they are and how to reel them in. So I think that would be very helpful in a sense with people
And
in
it's not
general.
just my story. I have seen
Yeah.
people get affected by this. I was having a coffee with a friend, and he did this like a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, he's affected by it. Oh, I did this and then I didn't get accepted. So our need for acceptance is somehow
Mm.
rooted in how other people perceive us. I've been in the technologies for the last 20 years. This is a skill that a lot of people don't have. They may be really good in their subjects, but they just don't know how to handle their emotions. And that affects the way they come across to different people, to others at work. I feel that's a kind of very difficult area for a lot of people. If we can be mindful about that a little bit, I think it can
Mm.
make a big difference.
Yeah. You mean in the way people perceive somebody
Yes.
judgment wise, like seeing somebody's performance and then they judge them for what they perceive as not good enough or whatever. Is that
Yes.
what you're referring to? Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. once that comes to us, then we are
Mhm.
very conscious about, okay, this is my boundary, and I'm not letting that boundary be affected, as opposed to taking somebody in, like pleasing others to be accepted. That kind of gradually goes away. You mentioned in the beginning that we lack awareness in society in terms of coaching, in terms of growing and realizing our potential. Can you talk about some of the areas how we can improve from there?
I think a lot has to do with critical thinking. I think critical thinking is missing a lot. We're not really taught to critically think about things, about certain issues in life, and we just see things as black and white. We don't see the gray parts. We don't see nuance into things. We just think, okay, this person is this way. Okay, it has to be because of that. That person, I'll use myself as an example, someone who has had very bad anxiety and depression for since childhood, and it had just developed into something over time because I had never gotten help for it as a kid, and I just repeated that cycle, repeated that growth of my own depression and anxiety. So as an adult, I'm going to have maladaptive behaviors, and I'm going to adapt in a way that's not healthy. And so if I am struggling, or if I'm having a hard time, if I'm always stuck and I can't figure out my money thing, and if I can't figure out this, people on the outside are going to say, oh my God, he's so lazy. Like, he really needs to get his stuff together because he's not going to go, he's not going to go anywhere. Or like in my 20s, I was dating somebody and this person said, I don't want to go into the gutter with you. I wasn't like doing anything bad or anything, but I was struggling. I was in my 20s, was like so struggling. And people get that, just go to that automatic judgment, right? Instead of thinking like, oh, I wonder if mental health is a problem in this country. I wonder if it is a crisis, like a health crisis in many countries. And yeah, so I think that is a huge thing that is missing in this. And I see that that's a huge thing with racism, classism, and all of these areas where people see something on the outside and they're going to just snap judge it based on what they thought or what they were taught, instead of getting into the middle there and figuring it out and looking at different angles and knowing how something started, know how something started historically and how it led up to today. And so there's so many aspects to it. So I think definitely critical thinking would be helpful, would be a good start, would be a good start. There's so many things that could change in society in a lot of ways. But there's so much wrapped up in so many different things and so many different ways that it's just, you have to pull it apart and look at one thing at a time. And I think for me, critical thought is, because I didn't grow up that way. I wasn't taught to think critically ever until I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, I was in my mid 40s. That's when I started to think. I was like, oh, okay, wow, I can think about this differently. And okay, this makes sense now. Okay, that makes sense now. That's when I started to like not be so judgmental, and I looked at my own biases and my own things that I have made judgments about people. And it was incredible when you get that awareness of critical thought and expansion of, there are things outside of my own scope, outside of my own experiences, then like life changes. It gets harder. I mean, it gets more intense and it gets more serious because there's just a lot. There's a lot going on out there. But I don't know, once you get that, when you get it, you just want to keep getting it. You want to keep growing. And you do become I don't know, you start to become a healthier person when you can see other people outside of what you think they are.
And this whole subject of critical thinking, it is huge. As you said rightly, there are so many ways to look at it. But how do they get started when everything is tangled? Then what can they do differently? How does critical thinking start?
Yeah, critical thinking is, when you hear that, you're thinking, oh, college, I have to have a degree. It sounds fancy, right? Critical thought. And when I heard the term, I was like, what does that even mean? Until I understood what it meant. So I think maybe to make it more, to simplify it, is to just, I don't know, like you, if a problem happens or something comes up, you encourage someone to look at it from a different angle. Like you encourage that person to maybe consider something different. Just consider something else. Consider a new thing or consider a different perspective just for a second. Let go of what you're thinking right now about that person who's living on the street in New York City asking for money, who's homeless. And you're totally ripping that person apart because of what they're doing. But for a moment, think about where they may have come from. Think about what led them to that place. Just think about that. And I don't know, that's an approach that I take in my own life. When I see something and I'm like, I'm going to judge it and I don't like it, then I start to think about, okay, I wonder if this person has family, or I wonder really what got this person to where they are now. So I guess it just takes that one little instance of awareness, that suggestion, that's what I would do. I don't know. It's such a hard, things are entangled and it's hard to just try to, like a coach, being a coach, it's like I'm learning that I can't really coach everybody. I just feel so much safer and happier when I have a specific niche that I can focus on. And it's the same thing with that. For me, it's like I have to take one little tiny thing at a time, I think. And I think that's how people are able to process this kind of critical thinking information. You have to give it a little tiny piece at a time, because it can be overwhelming when you don't come from a place of thinking about things outside of the box. When you're like stuck in this way of thinking and seeing the world, all of a sudden something different is introduced to you, then you're like, oh my God. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue to be a bigot. I'm going to continue to be racist. I'm going to continue to be classist, because it's too much. And I'm just willing to stay ignorant. So for me, it's like starting just tiny pieces, I think.
That is really beautiful. I think we don't always take the time to
Mm-hmm.
stop our train of thoughts and put that overall thinking into that particular situation. I wanted to share something. It just reminded me
Mm-hmm.
of this. I've started this podcast earlier this year, and for first couple of months it was audio only. When I felt that if I upgrade to video and if I learn to do all the editing and things, then it would probably be much nicer and more acceptable. That's what is happening. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I've generally got a really good feedback on the podcast. Now, when I was getting started, someone said to me, and I was sharing the episodes on social media and stuff, and said, "Oh, your podcast is a horrible thing. You don't know how to speak. You don't know how to place yourself in front of the mic. There is no caption. We have no idea what you're saying." And I was shocked. Oh my God, what's going on? And I have put so much of love and compassion and everything into this whole idea. And how can someone be so brutal about this, even if it is bad? Why do people say such horrible things? I just said thank you. And if there is something that I can improve, I'll definitely do, because I constantly think about improving and I work with so many guests and that enriches me. So I hope that podcast will become better in times to
Mm-hmm.
come. And a couple of months later, the same person came back to me and said I was not in a good mental state. And thank you that you took the high ground and you showed the maturity about the whole thing, the way I became very bitter to you.
Mm.
So it's been a very kind of valuable life lesson for me, even if I knew that I had nothing to do with my presentation or my voice or everything. But the whole thing transformed in a matter of few months. And we have
Mm.
our whole life together to apply that
Yeah.
thinking, that particular lens.
Wow. That's like full circle. when
Yeah.
someone can admit that, and maybe validate the
Yes.
hard work that you're doing. I love your podcast. Your podcast is beautiful. I love your voice, and I like how you present yourself. It's very peaceful and very
Thank you
welcoming.
so much. Now that I know that you write and you compose your own show, is it possible for you to share something with us?
A couple weeks down the road, it would be ready. But let's just say it's a show about coaching, not about life coaching, but it, like, the life coaching is the shell, and the inner part of it has to do with what got me to life coaching and why I may still struggle with some of the terminology, some of the life coaching mentality that's out there that I still have a struggle with, and coupled with my own internal struggles, such as having cancer and mental health challenges. So that, in a nutshell, is what is the start of that show.
Wish you all the best for the show. I think I have gone through what I had in mind to go through with you. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience? Is there anything you'd like to summarize for the audience who joined us for the discussion today?
Not in particular, just in particularly, just for anyone who is just figuring life out. It's there's no rush. It's not a marathon. We get pressured into performing a certain way, the better way, or fast, depending on who your parents are, depending on who your friends are, depending on how you grew up. But I don't know. It's sometimes all of that can get ingrained into our mind, and it's hard to break through that shell of what everybody else is expecting of me or somebody else. Nothing really, just encouraging people to just one step at a time, really. One step at a time.
Thank you so much for joining us on Stories and Stanza and share your beautiful thoughts with us. And thank you, audience, for joining us today and listening to this interview.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was wonderful.